Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. North Korea is becoming an increasingly important factor in both regional security and global diplomacy. From its growing military partnership with Russia to the future of North Korean soldiers captured in Ukraine, developments surrounding Pyongyang are raising new legal, diplomatic, and security questions. Now, at the same time, tensions on the Korean Peninsula continue to evolve, making it even more important to understand where North Korea may be headed next. So what should we make of the latest developments, and what could they mean for South Korea? To help us break it all down, we're joined in the studio by Go Myung-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. Very big welcome, Dr. Go.
Good to see you again.
And also joining us is Matthew David Jenkins, Associate Professor of Political Science at Gyeongsang National University. Good to see you.
Good evening. Good to be here.
So, Professor Jenkins, to begin with, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha met with South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Hyun Monday to discuss the future of the captured North Korean soldiers. The two sides agreed that the soldiers' individual wishes should be respected, along with international law and humanitarian principles. How would you assess the outcome of those talks?
Yeah, so I think this is a good development in the sense that it moves this from a sort of a political question to a humanitarian question, right? Because the bigger context was prior to this, Russia had proposed exchanging Ukrainian soldiers for the North Korean soldiers, who would then, of course, be repatriated back to North Korea. And so it is sort of a deal, right? A prisoner swap, right? So now this is a different tone, right? So it seems clear that both the Ukraine and the Ukraine and South Korea have agreed on a common mutual framework that respects international law, humanitarian principles, the broader humanitarian principles, right, and the individual wills, the desires of the soldiers themselves, right. And so that's a pretty significant change, and that's a good development going forward. Specifically, what that means is that they have to adhere to the Third Geneva Convention, which has a principle of non-refoulement, which means that you cannot send prisoners back to a country where they're going to be subject to torture or some kind of repression or some kind of punishment, right, for betraying their country or something. Which in this case seems to be the truth, because both of the soldiers have admitted that they want to go back to South Korea. So that is a sign of betrayal, right, from the North Korean perspective. So in any case, the bigger thing is that they agreed to this broad framework, and that's the important takeaway there.
Right. Would there be any legal processes that would follow?
Sorry, legal processes that follow.
Mm-hmm. So, they chose to come to South Korea. So would there be any legal processes that needs to follow?
Sure. I think there'll be some processes in order to repatriate them, to make them, South Korea does not recognize, does not recognize North Korean citizenship, so they would automatically recognize as South Korean citizens by South Korean law.
Mm-hmm. So Professor Jenkins just touched upon punishment. Speaking of which, so these captured soldiers themselves, they hoped to come to Korea. But what would be the risks if they had been returned back to North Korea, Dr.
I think Professor Jenkins put it really succinctly already, that North Korean regime considers essentially surrendering or being captured as a prisoner as a form of defection, and the punishment for defection is capital punishment, is death. And what makes this worse in the case of North Korea is that North Korea, in fact, the punishment it's not limited to the individual who committed quote-unquote crime in the eyes of the regime. The North Korean regime uses the concept of a guilt by association. So at the very least, the family members of the captured soldiers, the prisoners of war currently held in Ukraine, would at very least be expelled from where they live, and at worst, they could be sent to political prison camps from which they are unlikely to emerge alive. So this is in fact the biggest holdback, holding the prisoners, actually, sorry, the North Korean soldiers from considering even entertaining the idea of surrendering because they know that the punishment is not limited to themselves. In fact, it's applied to the family members themselves. So I think this is the biggest deterrence against surrendering for North Korean soldiers. And this is the reason why there are so few cases of captured prisoners from North Korea. And this is interesting because I think, and the fact of the matter is, I think there's some gray area right now regarding the soldiers because, prisoners of war held in Ukraine because by Korean constitution, I think Professor Jenkins already alluded to it. The moment they express their essentially the wish to come to South Korea, and that's actually been conveyed to an official channel, or if they in fact encounter themselves in the South Korean territory. But in this case, they're clearly in Ukraine. So just conveying the message of defection or coming to South Korea to an official channel, in fact, entitles them to South Korean citizenship. So in a way, the two prisoners of war held in Ukraine, in a way, they could be considered to be South Korean nationals already. So which, in fact, creates a lot of dilemma for the South Korean government because that would automatically oblige the South Korean government to go to Kiev and then demand the Ukrainian government to repatriate these prisoners of war to South Korea. So I think this is the reason why there is so much I would say, gray area, ambiguity about the status of the North Korean prisoners. And I say this is also the reason why I think there's been so much delay in resolving their situation.
Mm-hmm. Right. So South Korea, we can't ignore the human rights of these captured North Korean soldiers. But at the same time, expanding support for Ukraine could further strain ties with Russia and affect security on the peninsula itself. Professor Jenkins, what principles should guide Seoul's approach here?
Yeah, so I think we want to keep those as two separate issues, right? The humanitarian issue and the strategic issue. As we said earlier, for the POWs, I mean, that's going to be a humanitarian issues where the principles are, as I said earlier, humanitarian principles, international law, and the individual will of the POWs themselves. So for the strategic part, so South Korea currently is not providing lethal weapons to the Ukraine. It's providing other kinds of assistance like military gear, mine detectors, helmets, and things of this nature. And indirectly, it's providing ammunition to its allies, who are then giving that ammunition to Ukraine. So it's moving indirectly. But so I think that the key thing for South Korea is to continue to maintain that principle and don't provide weapons, lethal weapons to Ukraine, because if they do, then that's going to further, bring to surface the appearance that they are like kind of a belligerent in this conflict, right? And that's not good because then that's going to give Russia an incentive to further cooperation with North Korea, right? Which is not going to be good for Korea. And so you could have avoid this boomerang effect and avoid escalating tensions over here by maintaining its current course, right, and not providing lethal weapons.
Mm-hmm. So for Seoul, it's really a balancing act on different, fronts. So from Ukraine's perspective, Dr. Go, the issue could also help strengthen cooperation with South Korea. What is Kyiv trying to achieve here?
Well, clearly there's, I wouldn't really call it a propaganda value, but it in fact has a very important diplomatic significance, not just in terms of Ukraine-Korean relations, but also to the message to the international community. The capture of these North Korean soldiers as prisoners of war proved Ukrainian, everybody knew that North Korea has sent up to 15,000 soldiers to help Russia to fight Ukraine. But nonetheless, capturing these soldiers proves the point. In fact, these are physical evidence of North Korean participation on the side of Russia fighting against Ukraine. So and in that sense, it's a huge boon to the Ukrainians' diplomatic message. And I think this is the reason why these soldiers were captured by not by ordinary Ukrainian soldiers after the battle. In fact, there's a concerted operation by Ukrainian special forces to capture the soldiers. So in that sense, the Ukrainian government knew beforehand how important it was to capture North Korean soldiers as live prisoners. And so in that sense, I think Ukraine has achieved a major diplomatic victory, because this, in addition to putting the sending the message to the international community that the Russians and North Koreans are essentially cooperating together, and that increases the threat against not just to Ukraine but to Europe. So, and the second, this creates a bridge between the South Korean government and Ukraine. We have to take into consideration the fact that there's been a change of government in Seoul during the duration of the Ukraine war. And we know for a fact that the previous conservative administration was much more proactive, assisting Ukraine, which in fact came at the cost of deteriorating our relationship between Seoul and Moscow. And the President Lee Jae-myung wants to, in a way, not to restore the relationship, but in a way maintain a good chance of communication with Moscow. So Ukraine, by highlighting the issue of North Korean participation in the war, as well as the existence of prisoners of war, in fact sends a message to not just the South Korean government, to the South Korean society, that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is not that far from the Korean Peninsula, and also it increases the trust building between the government in Seoul and in Ukraine. So this is a perfect trifecta for the Ukrainian government.
Right, so it kind of served as an opportunity to strengthen Ukraine's diplomatic position. Now, if we look ahead, then, Professor Jenkins, how could the handling of these prisoners of war affect Pyongyang's future overseas troop deployments and a broader military strategy moving forward?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, North Korea doesn't have many allies, and its relationship with China is sort of is not always smooth, a little bit rocky recently, especially. And so Russia has become a critical ally for North Korea. And through its participation in the Russia-Ukraine war, it's gained invaluable experience in modern combat, right? So, for example, in dealing with drones, right? Which is going to shape the future. That's going to be very important in the wars of the future. And so it's just, I would see it as an invaluable ally, right? And so supporting Russia is going to be part of that, right? And I don't think they're going to be able to move away from that. On the other hand, right, if North Korean soldiers get captured and they get repatriated back to South Korea, well, then you have a problem of an intelligence leak, right? These North Korean soldiers have fought on the front lines. They have gained a lot of knowledge about North Korean and Russian military operations. That information is, is very, very valuable to South Korea and its allies, and therefore very, very makes North Korea very, very vulnerable, right? Or at least increases its vulnerability. And so that's not a trivial concern, right, for North Korea. And so I think that said, because of the importance of Russia, I don't think they're going to stop deploying troops, at least in this particular conflict. I think that what's going to happen probably is that they're just going to tighten up, put tighter controls on personnel, right? Tougher screening, right? Psychological screening to assess their loyalty to the regime and so forth. I think that's going to be the main result, not necessarily a change in the deployment of North Korean troops.
All right, thank you for that. Now, Dr. Go, let's go deeper into North Korean domestic situation. So there's speculation that Pyongyang will hold this military parade in the coming months. If one would be held, when would it likely happen?
Well, so the earliest date will be I think July 21st, which is the Armistice Day. That's the day when the not two Koreas, but the United Nations forces and China and North Korea signed the armistice to end the Korean War. North Korea considers to be the day of victory, so that gives them a good excuse to have a parade. But I don't think that will be the case. I mean, I think traditionally North Korea held the major parades on September 9th, which happens to be the day of foundation of the North Korean state, DPRK. Or a month later, in the October 10th, which marks the anniversary of foundation of North Korea's Workers' Party. So, So there are different logistics issues as well as the significance of the dates, besides the year, in fact, and because North Koreans consider years of multiple of 5 to be very important. So essentially, years that end in either 5, 10, 15, 20. And in fact, this year, doesn't correspond to the criteria. But nonetheless, I think it's all about the timing. So North Koreans use the parades to send a strategic message especially to the United States. So when North Korea and the United States were engaged in a very, I would say, serious conversation regarding the denuclearization during the first Trump presidency in 2019 and 20. North Korea used the occasion of these anniversaries to demonstrate their newly acquired ballistic missile technologies for instance, by revealing new ICBMs, as well as testing them before the parades and so forth. So, and then because we are again back with President Trump in office in the White House, the North Koreans could be tempted to mount another parade to send a message. And I think this is the reason why there are speculations that North Korea could be preparing for another parade. And they, in fact, held a parade earlier this year, but then it was mostly composed of live humans and soldiers, so it didn't really have an impact that revealing of showcasing a brand new intercontinental ballistic missile would have. So all eyes are on these dates, September 9th, as well as October 10th, for the possibility that North Koreans could reveal their latest intercontinental ballistic missiles, which is actually made of composite materials, which shows that North Koreans have attained a very high level of the ICBM development. Or maybe, in fact, they can declare that they have completed their missile development. So we have to wait and see. But then, despite the fact that this year is not also a remarkable year by any means for North Koreans, nonetheless, the timing and the fact that President Trump is back in the White House could motivate North Koreans to have another major parade.
Oh, so we'll be looking forward to their latest messages coming from there. But within North Korea, we hear that it's continuing to build fences and laying landmines and constructing tactical roads near the military demarcation line, which is very concerning, of course. What is the significance of these kinds of actions coming from the North?
So in order to understand the significance of this military buildup near the demarcation line, we have to look into the structure of the demilitarized zone that separates the two Koreas. So the demilitarized zone, or DMZ, in fact, it consists of a buffer zone about 4 kilometers in length. So it's divided exactly 2 kilometers each by the center line, which is actually the military demarcation line. But then these 2 kilometers buffer from the military demarcation line to each the demilitarized zone lines on each Korea, in fact, has to remain completely devoid of military presence. So the significance of North Koreans building structures near the MDL, or military demarcation line, means that North Koreans are first violating the terms of the armistice because they are militarizing the demilitarized zone. And North Koreans are doing this because, I think, not because they are preparing to, say, initiate conflict or skirmishes with South Korea along the MDL. I think North Koreans are doing this for the optics of it, meaning I think North Koreans want to send a message not just to South Korea, but to the United Nations Command that actually controls access to the DMZ, that they are essentially translating the newly promulgated the two hostile states doctrine to the military reality, meaning that North Koreans are on the defensive and then they're on a hair trigger alert in case the conflict arises with South Korea. So it's a form of raising tension, but I think given the fact that the North Korean presence is just merely presence, not an actual, say, fortification, or like an offensive posture, I think it's more about sending a message, political message to Seoul that South Korea shouldn't even dream about re-engaging North because their actual military posture is one of confrontation.
Then, Dr. Go, I must ask, then why do you think they're trying to, show this strong stance right now?
Because they want to essentially dispel any hope on the South Korean side that North Korea is getting soft, meaning that North Koreans could then be entertaining maybe options to engage South Korea diplomatically. And the reason why South Korea South Korea hopes everlasting, hope springs eternal in a way. The reason is because North Koreans have a completely different attitude when it comes to engaging Washington. So North Korea was very antagonistic towards President Biden, but with President Trump, clearly North Korea is sending a very different message. The tone has changed, and North Korea is leaving the door to dialogue open. But that's not so. That in fact creates space or hope on the part of South Korea that there could be room for inter-Korean dialogue for South Korea as well. So, and then North Koreans want to send the message that that's not the case, that their attitude or their posture essentially their willingness to engage in diplomatically only happens or it's only reserved for the Americans, not for South Koreans.
Thank you for that explanation. Now, finally, to our last question, Professor Jenkins, North Korea, China, and Russia are discussing the development of the Tuman River area. Some believe the project could eventually involve South Korea, U.S., and Japan. How would you assess this initiative?
Yeah, so they've been talking about this initiative for a while. It involves extensive cooperation, especially between Russia and North Korea at the expense of China, right? So I think, unfortunately, it would give Korea greater access. It potentially could give South Korea, greater access to the Eurasian market. But I think realistically, it's not going to happen right now because South Korea is an ally of the United States, right? Who is the enemy of North Korea and Russia, basically, and they're sort of fighting a proxy war right now. So I don't see that at all very likely. And same thing for Japan. So I think the importance of this project, right, is not necessarily, I would say it's less about the potential involvement of Japan or South Korea, but more about its implications for North Korea and Russia's relationship with China, right? As North Korea and Russia get closer and closer, this could create the possibility for strategic leverage against Beijing, right? So I think that would be its main importance at this point. At least until the war in Ukraine is over, I think it's very unlikely for them to get involved, for Japan and South Korea to get involved.
So we'll have to see how this level of cooperation would unfold in the coming months and years. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Jenkins.
Thank you so much.
And of course, Dr. Go, we really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.